Imagine a place of eternal torment where the wicked are punished and the flames never die out. A realm of darkness separated from all that is good and holy. What comes to your mind? That's right. We're talking about hell. Hell, a word that strikes fear into the hearts of many and a concept that has captivated human imagination for millennia. But what is hell really like? Is it the fiery pit we see depicted in art and media? Or is there more to it than that? Please kindly subscribe to our channel for more biblical video. In this video, we're going to dive deep into the biblical descriptions of hell. We'll explore its various names and depictions in both the Old and New Testaments. We'll examine Jesus' teachings on the subject and look at how early Christian writers understood this concept. But why is this important? Why should we care about understanding hell? First, it's a significant part of many religious belief systems, particularly in Christianity. Understanding hell helps us grasp the full spectrum of biblical teaching on the afterlife. Second, the concept of hell raises profound questions about justice, morality, and the nature of God. And finally, for many, the reality of hell serves as a motivation for righteous living and evangelism. Whether you're a believer seeking deeper understanding, a skeptic questioning these ideas, or simply curious about this aspect of religious thought, this exploration will provide you with valuable insights. We'll examine the texts, consider different interpretations, and strive to paint a comprehensive picture of what the Bible really says about hell. So, are you ready to descend into the depths of this controversial and often misunderstood topic? Let's begin our journey to uncover what hell is really like, according to the Bible. Now that we've set the stage, let's dive into the biblical terminology for hell. It's crucial to understand that. The English word hell is actually a translation of several different terms used in the original Hebrew and Greek texts. We'll explore four key terms: Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, and Tartarus. Let's start with Sheol, the Hebrew term found in the Old Testament. Sheol is often described as the realm of the dead, a place beneath the earth where both the righteous and unrighteous were believed to go after death. In passages like Psalm 16:10 and Job 7:9, Sheol is portrayed not necessarily as a place of punishment, but as a shadowy underworld. It's important to note that the concept of Sheol evolved over time in Jewish thought. Moving to the New Testament, we encounter the Greek word Hades. In many ways, Hades is the Greek equivalent of Sheol. In fact, when the Old Testament was translated into Greek in the Septuagint, Sheol was often rendered as Hades. Jesus uses the term Hades in Luke 16:23 in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, describing it as a place of torment. However, like Sheol, Hades doesn't always carry the full weight of what we typically think of as hell. Perhaps the term that most closely aligns with our modern concept of hell is Gehenna. Gehenna refers to the Valley of Hinnom, a real place outside Jerusalem that was used as a garbage dump where fires constantly burned. Jesus used Gehenna as a powerful metaphor for divine punishment. In Matthew 5:22, he warns that one who says, "You fool, will be in danger of the fire of Gehenna." This term carries a strong connotation of judgment and eternal punishment. Finally, we have Tartarus, a term that appears only once in the New Testament, in 2 Peter 2:4. In Greek mythology, Tartarus was the deepest part of the underworld, reserved for the punishment of the wicked. Peter uses this term to describe a place where fallen angels are held until judgment. It's notable that this is the only time this specific term is used, and it's applied to rebellious spirits, not human souls. Understanding these terms, Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, and Tartarus, gives us a more nuanced view of how the concept of hell is presented in the Bible. It's not a single uniform idea, but rather a complex notion that developed over time and carries different shades of meaning in different contexts. With this terminology in mind, we're now prepared to delve deeper into specific descriptions of hell found in the Old Testament. But before we do, take a moment to reflect on how these various terms might shape our understanding of the afterlife in biblical thought. Please kindly subscribe to our channel for more biblical video. Now that we've explored the terminology, let's delve into how the Old Testament describes hell, or more accurately, the realm of the dead and divine punishment. Remember, the concept of hell as we know it today wasn't fully formed in Old Testament times, but we can see its early roots. 1. References in Psalms. The book of Psalms, a collection of ancient Hebrew poetry and songs, contains several references to Sheol and the fate of the wicked. Let's look at a few key passages. In Psalm 9:17, we read, "The wicked shall return to Sheol, all the nations that forget God." This suggests Sheol as a destination for those who reject God. Psalm 55:15 presents a more vivid image. "Let death come upon them. Let them go down alive to Sheol. For evil is in their dwelling place and in their heart." Here, Sheol is portrayed as a punishment for the wicked. It's important to note that in many Psalms, Sheol is described more as a general realm of the dead rather than a place of punishment. The psalmists often express hope that God will deliver them from Sheol, as in Psalm 16:10. 2. Prophetic visions, Isaiah, Ezekiel. The prophetic books offer some of the most vivid and symbolic descriptions related to divine judgment and the afterlife. Let's start with Isaiah. Isaiah 66:24 presents a striking image. "And they shall go out and look on the dead bodies of the men who have rebelled against me. For their worm shall not die, their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be an abhorrence to all flesh." This passage, later quoted by Jesus, became influential in shaping ideas about eternal punishment. Turning to Ezekiel, we find the concept of a pit associated with judgment. In Ezekiel 32:18-32, the prophet describes various nations descending to the pit or the depths of the earth. While this isn't exactly hell as we might think of it, it does present a gloomy afterlife for those judged by God. These prophetic visions use powerful imagery to convey the idea of divine judgment. They don't present a systematic theology of hell, but they do lay groundwork for later developments in Jewish and Christian thought. 3. Book of Daniel. Finally, let's look at the book of Daniel, which offers one of the clearest Old Testament references to a resurrection and judgment. Daniel 12:2 states, "And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." This passage introduces the concept of a final judgment, with eternal consequences, a key element in later understandings of hell. As we can see, the Old Testament doesn't present a unified concept of hell. Instead, it offers various images and ideas about divine judgment, the realm of the dead, and the fate of the wicked. These concepts would later be developed and reinterpreted in the New Testament and subsequent Christian theology. With these Old Testament descriptions in mind, we're now ready to explore how Jesus himself spoke about hell. His teachings would significantly shape Christian understanding of the afterlife and divine judgment. We've explored the Old Testament's perspective on the afterlife and divine judgment. Now let's turn to one of the most influential figures in shaping our understanding of hell, Jesus Christ. Jesus spoke about hell and eternal punishment more than any other figure in the Bible, and his teachings have profoundly influenced Christian theology. 1. Parables mentioning hell. Jesus often used parables to convey deep spiritual truths, and several of these touch on the concept of hell, or eternal punishment. In the parable of the wheat and the tares, found in Matthew 13:24-30 and 36:43, Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a field where both wheat and weeds grow together. At the harvest, the weeds are gathered and burned. Jesus explains, "The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Similarly, in the parable of the net in Matthew 13:47-50, Jesus likens the kingdom of heaven to a net that catches all kinds of fish. The bad fish are thrown away, and Jesus states, "So it will be at the end of the age, and the angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. These parables use vivid imagery to convey the idea of a final judgment and the separation of the righteous from the unrighteous, with severe consequences for the latter. 2. Direct statements about eternal punishment. Beyond parables, Jesus made several direct statements about hell and eternal punishment. Perhaps the most famous is from the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5:29-30, Jesus says, "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell." This graphic hyperbole emphasizes the seriousness with which Jesus viewed the threat of hell. He's not advocating self-mutilation, but rather stressing the importance of avoiding sin at all costs. In Matthew 25:41, during his description of the final judgment, Jesus says to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." This passage explicitly mentions eternal fire as a place of punishment, not just for evil spirits, but for unrighteous humans as well. 3. The rich man and Lazarus. Luke 16:19-31. 2 minutes. One of Jesus' most detailed descriptions of the afterlife comes in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, found in Luke 16:19-31. This story provides a vivid picture of the contrast between paradise and torment after death. In this parable, a rich man who lived in luxury dies and finds himself in Hades, in torment. He sees Lazarus, a poor man he had ignored in life, comforted at Abraham's side. The rich man begs for relief, but Abraham explains that a great chasm separates them, preventing passage between the two realms. This parable is unique in its detailed description of the afterlife, including the immediate experience after death and the inability to change one's fate after that point. It's important to note that while this is a parable and may not be meant as a literal description of the afterlife, it does reflect Jesus' teaching that one's earthly life has eternal consequences. Jesus' teachings on hell and eternal punishment are stark and often uncomfortable. They present hell as a real and terrible possibility, emphasizing the gravity of our moral and spiritual choices in this life. These teachings have been foundational in shaping Christian understanding of the afterlife and the urgency of the gospel message. As we move forward, we'll explore how the early Christian writers, particularly in the New Testament, epistles, further developed these concepts. Their interpretations of Jesus' teachings would go on to shape centuries of Christian thought about hell and eternal destiny. We've explored Jesus' teachings on hell, which form the foundation of Christian understanding. Now let's examine how the early Christian writers, particularly in the New Testament epistles and the book of Revelation, further developed these concepts. 1. Paul's writings to 2 minutes. Let's start with the Apostle Paul, whose letters form a significant portion of the New Testament. While Paul doesn't use the term hell directly, he does speak about judgment and the fate of those who reject God. In 2 Thessalonians 1:9, Paul writes, "They will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might." This concept of eternal destruction and separation from God aligns with Jesus' teachings about hell. Paul emphasizes the relational aspect of punishment, being cut off from God's presence. In Romans 2:5-8, Paul speaks of God's righteous judgment, saying that for those who are self-seeking and don't obey the truth, there will be wrath and fury. While not explicitly mentioning hell, this aligns with the concept of divine punishment. 2. Peter's description, 2 minutes. Now, let's turn to the Apostle Peter's writings. Peter provides some vivid descriptions related to divine judgment and the fate of the unrighteous. In 2 Peter 2:4-9, Peter writes, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. Here, Peter uses the Greek word Tartarus, which we discussed earlier, to describe the place where sinful angels are held. He also speaks of the unrighteous being kept under punishment, reinforcing the idea of judgment and consequences for sin. In 1 Peter 3:19-20, Peter makes a mysterious reference to Christ preaching to spirits in prison, which some interpret as related to the afterlife. However, the exact meaning of this passage is debated among scholars. 3. Book of Revelation, 2 minutes. Finally, let's examine the book of Revelation, which provides some of the most vivid and controversial descriptions of final judgment in the entire Bible. Revelation 20:10-15 describes a scene of final judgment. It speaks of the devil being thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, followed by the judgment of humanity. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. This lake of fire is often interpreted as a description of hell or eternal punishment. Revelation 14:11 provides another striking image. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. This verse is often cited in discussions about the nature and duration of hell. It's crucial to remember that Revelation is a highly symbolic book, and interpretations of its imagery have varied widely throughout Christian history. Some see these descriptions as literal, while others view them as metaphorical representations of spiritual realities. The New Testament epistles and Revelation build upon Jesus' teachings, providing further details and imagery related to divine judgment and the fate of the unrighteous. These writings have been instrumental in shaping Christian doctrines about hell and the afterlife. We've explored the biblical descriptions of hell from the Old Testament through Jesus' teachings and the writings of the early church. Now let's delve into how these scriptures have been interpreted throughout Christian history, leading to 3 main theological perspectives on the nature of hell. 1. Eternal conscious torment, 2 minutes. The first and most traditional view is known as eternal conscious torment. This perspective holds that hell is a place of never-ending conscious punishment for those who have rejected God. Proponents of this view point to scriptures we've discussed, such as Jesus' words about eternal fire and a weeping and gnashing of teeth, or Revelation's lake of fire, where torment goes on forever and ever. This view has been the dominant position in much of Christian history, especially in Western Christianity. It's based on the argument that sin against an infinite God requires infinite punishment, and that God's justice demands eternal consequences for rejecting his offer of salvation. Critics of this view argue that it seems to conflict with God's love and the concept of proportional justice. They also question whether finite human beings can truly commit infinite sin. 2. Annihilationism. The second view is known as annihilationism or conditional immortality. This perspective suggests that, after a period of punishment, those who have rejected God will cease to exist rather than suffer eternally. Annihilationists point to scriptures that speak of the wicked being destroyed or perishing, such as Matthew 10:28, where Jesus says to fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. They argue that eternal life is a gift from God to the redeemed, not an inherent quality of all souls. Therefore, those who reject God will eventually cease to exist after facing judgment. This view, they claim, better aligns with God's justice and love. 3. Universalism. The third major view is Christian universalism. This perspective holds that eventually all people will be reconciled to God and saved, even if some must undergo a period of purification or punishment first. Universalists emphasize scriptures that speak of God's desire for all to be saved, such as 1 Timothy 2:4, and passages that speak of all things being reconciled to God, like Colossians 1:20. Host closes the book and looks directly at the camera. They argue that God's love will ultimately triumph over all sin and rebellion, and that the purpose of hell is corrective rather than purely punitive. Critics, however, contend that this view doesn't take seriously human free will or the biblical warnings about judgment. Each of these views has been held by sincere Christians throughout history, and each attempts to grapple with the biblical data and the nature of God. The debate continues in theological circles today, with implications not just for our understanding of the afterlife, but for how we view God's justice, love, and the urgency of the gospel message. As we conclude our exploration of what hell is really like according to the Bible, it's important to remember that this topic has profound implications. Regardless of one's specific beliefs about hell, the biblical authors consistently emphasize the seriousness of our moral and spiritual choices in this life. We've taken a journey through biblical descriptions and theological interpretations of hell. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned and consider its implications. Jesus' teachings brought hell into sharp focus, with vivid parables and direct statements about eternal consequences. The apostles, particularly Paul and Peter, and the book of Revelation further developed these ideas, presenting powerful images of final judgment. Finally, we examined how these scriptures have been interpreted throughout Christian history, leading to three main views: eternal conscious torment, annihilationism, and universalism. Each of these perspectives grapples with the biblical texts and our understanding of God's nature. I encourage you to reflect deeply on what we've discussed. Consider the implications of these views not just for the afterlife, but for how we live now. How does your understanding of hell shape your view of God? How does it influence your interactions with others? These are weighty questions that deserve careful thought and, for many, prayerful consideration. First, continue to study and explore this topic. The Bible encourages us to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. 1 Peter 3:15. Understanding different perspectives on hell can help us engage in meaningful discussions about faith and our eternity. Second, let this exploration motivate you to live with purpose and compassion. Whether you view hell as eternal torment, annihilation, or temporary separation from God, the Bible consistently urges us to take our spiritual lives seriously and to care deeply for others. Finally, remember that at its core, the Christian message is one of hope. John 3:16 tells us that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Whatever hell may be, the good news of the gospel is that through Christ we have the opportunity to experience eternal joy in God's presence. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of what hell is really like according to the Bible. May it inspire you to dig deeper, think critically, and live purposefully. Until next time, take care and keep seeking truth. Please kindly subscribe to our channel for more biblical video and comment, share, and like.